In the early 19th century, the sun was setting on the vast empire of China, a civilization rich in culture, trade, and tradition. Meanwhile, across the oceans, Britain was on the brink of a remarkable transformation, driven by a single, insatiable hunger. It wasn't gold, silver, or traditional commodities that fueled this ambition, but something much darker: opium. How did a powerful nation descend into an insidious pursuit for dominance through drugs? What led to a confrontation that would drastically reshape global history and alter the national identity of China forever? Stick around, because what you're about to learn may surprise you. The Opium Wars, as they would come to be known, are often dismissed as a mere footnote in the annals of imperialism. Yet, they unveil the tragic interplay between commerce, addiction, and power that not only devastated millions but also reshaped international relations. Picture this: in the early 1800s, British merchants were thriving, thanks to their burgeoning appetite for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. Yet, one crucial element remained unobtained: how to balance trade when China was largely uninterested in British goods. Thus, enter opium. This powerful narcotic, derived from poppies, became Britain's secret weapon, allowing them to tip the scales in their favor. But you may be wondering, how did such a truth come to be accepted? The violence, the coercion, the moral implications, why didn't the world simply act? Prepare for a deep dive into the heart of an extraordinary conflict. It's stunning to think that an addiction would forge the route for Britain's economic supremacy at the expense of an entire nation. In 1830s China, opium was more than just a substance; it turned into a cultural crisis. Farmers turned from their traditional crops to grow opium poppies, swathes of land transformed to fuel foreign greed, and suddenly, millions were enslaved to this opiate's grip. What does this say about the nature of power and exploitation? These questions set the stage for the coming storm. Around 1839, the Chinese government, weary of the impacts of opium on its society, began to take action. The Daoguang Emperor commissioned Lin Zexu, a dedicated scholar and fierce opponent of opium, to eradicate the drug trade. His dramatic efforts, confiscating and destroying over 1,000 tons of opium in a surreal display of righteous anger, set into motion a chain of events that would escalate into war. You might think, isn't it commendable to stand up against such a blight? As we delve deeper, however, the story will twist in the most unexpected ways. After Lin's actions, Britain was faced with a haunting reality: their lucrative trade was being threatened. They had invested heavily and stood to lose not just profits but their hold over this vital market. The British response was swift and brutal. In what would become a symbol of imperial arrogance, Britain sent warships to China, claiming the right to free trade as their justification. The rhetoric was steeped in an assertion of superiority, grounded in a belief that their culture and way of life were inherently better. Might makes right, they thought, and this mentality would pave the way for bloodshed. In the heart of the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, we witnessed naval battles that pitted the wooden junks of the Chinese against the steam-powered iron warships of Britain. Can you imagine the shock of Chinese soldiers as they faced such technologically advanced weaponry? The reality was devastating: cities were bombarded, towns were burned, and eventually, the Treaty of Nanking was signed in 1842, marking the end of hostilities. But it came with a price that would haunt China for decades: indemnities, cessions of territory, and the insidious opening of ports to foreign trade, laying bare their vulnerability. But what does it mean for a nation to be forced into submission over a substance like opium? The societal impact was immediate and catastrophic. This treaty opened up the concept of unequal treaties, a term that would signify the exploitation and humiliation of China by foreign powers. What do you think goes through the minds of those who have endured such an experience? The psychological scars run deep, creating a profound sense of injustice that persists for generations. Yet, just when you think the worst is over, a peculiar twist unfolds. As it turns out, the opium trade didn't cease after the war. In fact, it flourished. Despite efforts to control the trade, the British, and later other Western powers, leveraged their newfound economic foothold to expand their influence. New opium dens sprang up, cluttered streets became havens for addiction, and the very fabric of society began to fray. This leads us to a haunting question: how does a nation reclaim its identity when so much of it has been overwritten by foreign vices? Fast forward to the Second Opium War in 1856. Britain, backed this time by France, sought even greater concessions from China. Here, the opium trade took on a more sinister dimension. It was no longer just a means for profit, but wielded as a political weapon. The Banner War, as it was deceitfully called, saw further incursions, deeper exploitation, and devastating consequences. How would one respond to the brutal imposition of one's own opiates? Spoiler, it wouldn't be pretty. As the British marched further into Chinese territory, the legendary city of Canton, Guangzhou, became a battlefield, much like a pawn sacrificed in a twisted game of chess. The Hechuan movement, later known as the Boxer Rebellion, emerged in the later years, fueled by a potent cocktail of anger and desperation against foreign domination. Could such a rebellion have altered the course of history? What ignites a people to rise against their oppressors, regardless of the odds? Through these waves of conflict, decades of British influence left scars etched deep within. An entire generation grew up with a tainted narrative. Opium became synonymous with foreign domination, corruption, and loss of sovereignty. The continuation of this ruthless game gradually revealed cracks in both the imperial structure and within China's own governance. But amidst the chaos, someone had to pay the price. The Chinese society crumbled under the weight of addiction, influencing cutting-edge policies that the Qing Dynasty was forced to confront. Recovery paths were fraught with challenges. Imagine trying to reclaim the hearts and minds of a nation devoured by addiction, an uphill journey filled with despair. And just when you think you grasp the sheer breadth of this tragedy, the narrative takes yet another unexpected turn. After years of suffering, the Chinese would slowly but surely rise to reclaim their independence, forging a national identity that stood against foreign oppression. The question becomes, can history's wounds ever truly heal? What comes next is a story beyond war, showcasing resilience, revival, and, ultimately, redemption. The Opium Wars serve as a pivotal turning point, igniting a renaissance of cultural rediscovery. As we peel back the layers of these events, the convergence of passion, pain, and political maneuvering unfolds to reveal an epic that not only shaped China, but also altered the Western world's perception of power and control. Stay tuned for the second part, where we'll explore the long-term repercussions of these conflicts, the lasting legacies of opium in both Western and Eastern societies, and how the struggle for autonomy and identity still resonates in today's world. You won't want to miss the incredible connections that bridge history with contemporary issues and the untold stories of resilience that emerge from the ashes of conflict. So, are you ready for the journey to continue? As we delve into the aftermath of the Opium Wars, we find ourselves confronting the existential questions that faced a battered yet resolute China. The emergence of a new national consciousness reflected not only a rejection of foreign subjugation but also an awakening to the need for reform. The wounds inflicted by the British, and later by other Western powers, were deep, but they lit the spark of change within a society that had long refused to be plundered without consequence. The repercussions of the Opium Wars echoed far beyond the battlefields. In the years following the Treaty of Nanking, China struggled not only with the immediate devastation of war but also with an internal crisis of identity. The Qing Dynasty, already weakened, found itself grappling with the urgent need to modernize. Western ideals and technologies began infiltrating this ancient realm, challenging the very fabric of a civilization that had long prided itself on its cultural superiority. This clash of traditions gave rise to passionate debates among Chinese intellectuals about how to integrate the Western advances while preserving the essence of their own heritage. A movement was born. It was one that would redefine the trajectory of Chinese society. The self-strengthening movement emerged during the late 19th century, as reform-minded officials recognized that military strength and economic independence were paramount for China's survival. Their efforts sought to embrace Western technology and practices while maintaining traditional values. Think of it as a balancing act on a tightrope stretched above a chasm of despair. The risks were immense, but the stakes were equally high. Educational reforms, industrial investments, and the modernization of military forces were all part of this ambitious undertaking. But what did this tension between tradition and modernization look like in practice? Schools began emphasizing science and engineering, while opium, previously tolerated on some level as a societal ill, was now viewed with renewed scrutiny due to its catastrophic implications for social order and public health. Reformers rallied against drug addiction, intertwining their message with nationalist sentiments. Perhaps it was no longer just about the drug itself, it was the insidious nature of foreign influence that it represented. Yet, these reformers found themselves pitted against a system resistant to change, where deeply entrenched Confucian ideals clashed with the harsh realities of a modernizing world. This push and pull led to fierce resistance from conservative elements within China, who viewed the reforms as a betrayal of their cultural legacy. In their eyes, what was at stake was far more than mere modernization. It was the preservation of identity, values, and a way of life that had endured for centuries. Amid this strife, the Boxer Rebellion of 1900 emerged as a fervent expression of discontent. Rooted in anti-foreign sentiment and fueled by the desire to reclaim China from external forces and internal corruption, the Boxers targeted not only foreign nationals but also Chinese Christians and those who had embraced Western ideas. This grassroots uprising echoed the collective anger of a people drowning in a sea of external manipulation, cultural dislocation, and social disintegration. What prompts such an uprising? It is, perhaps, a cornerstone of humanity's existence, the need to belong, to be seen, and to reclaim agency in one's own narrative. However, the result of the Boxer Rebellion was tragic. An allied force of 8 nations, including the United States and Japan, intervened, laying siege to Beijing and suppressing the revolt. The aftermath saw the signing of the Boxer Protocol, entailing punitive reparations that further deepened the scars of foreign domination. The rebellion served as a grim reminder that while the thirst for unity and independence was palpable, the path to reclaiming one's destiny was fraught with peril. How did a nation, so rich in history and culture, succumb to such painful indignities? The answer lies not only in the military might of foreign powers but also in an intrinsic struggle for agency. One could argue that the opium trade, as a symbol of deeper exploitation, served as an impetus for self-reflection on sovereignty and independence. The Chinese began to ask, what does it mean to be truly free? Emerging from this deep introspection was the rise of nationalism, a powerful movement towards the reclamation of China's identity. As the 20th century approached, a new wave of thinkers, political activists, and revolutionaries rose to prominence. Figures like Sun Yat-sen began to articulate visions for a modern China, one that could stand on equal footing with the powers that had long disdained it. The fall of the Qing Dynasty in 1911 marked not just the end of imperial rule but also the birth of the Republic of China. But nascent democracy doesn't come without struggles. The shadow of opium remained a potent symbol, embodying the remnants of imperialistic exploitation. Societal recovery necessitated not just political overhaul but a cultural renaissance, a reclamation of narrative that had once been overshadowed. How can a society redefine itself after such a profound loss? The Chinese were determined to find out. Thus, the 20th century in China was awash with upheaval, punctuated by civil war, the scars of colonialism, and the search for ideological clarity. The memory of the Opium Wars loomed like a specter over political discourse, reminding citizens of both vulnerability and resilience. Throughout this tumultuous landscape, the repercussions of addiction transcended the mere substance, evolving into a broader metaphor for the nation's trials and tribulations. As China confronted its complex legacy, navigating the dichotomy of tradition and modernity, national identity and foreign influence, the narrative began to shift. The lessons learned from the horror of foreign domination morphed into a unified desire to regain a sense of ownership over one's destiny. The legacy of the Opium Wars stoked a fierce passion for reform, innovation, and the recovery of a national identity deeply rooted in history yet yearning for the future. Now, as we look at contemporary issues in China, we find lingering echoes of this history. The themes of nationalism, foreign intervention, and societal recovery resonate strongly within the context of globalization. In a world where economic power often spills into cultural influence, the cautionary tales of the past serve as potent reminders of the necessity for vigilance and self-determination. Today, as China emerges as a global power, it wrestles not only with economic supremacy but also with the moral implications of its historical journey. But, beneath the surface of economic growth, we still find the remnants of opium's legacy. The debate over addiction, be it opium or other contemporary substances, has resurfaced in global dialogues surrounding public health, ethics, and human rights. The question persists: how does a society break the chains of past traumas while seeking to construct a healthier future? Ultimately, the story of the Opium Wars serves as an intricate tapestry woven from countless individual narratives of loss and reclaiming agency. The threads of struggle and resilience showcase humanity's capacity to rebound and redefine its place in the world. As we absorb this complex narrative, we must remember that history is not merely a series of events but a living, breathing dialogue across generations. In conclusion, the repercussions of the Opium Wars extend far beyond the late 19th century. They ripple into the fabric of modern society, shaping perceptions, relationships, and identities. The ambivalence of power dynamics, both foreign and domestic, continues to inform how countries navigate the global stage. The legacy of addiction, imperialism, and resilience molds not just the narrative of China but acts as a mirror reflecting the intricacies of our shared human experience. So, as we close this chapter of our exploration, let us hold on to the conviction that understanding history is a vital pursuit. It allows us to glean insights from the past, encouraging empathy, awareness, and, ultimately, the hope of moving forward. It's a call to recognize that while the chains of history may bind us, they also provide the impetus to forge a future built on lessons learned, values upheld, and an indomitable spirit of reclamation. The journey towards understanding continues to unfold. What roles will we play in this ongoing narrative? The answer is in our minds and hearts.